Mike.
I'm Brad.
And this is Ministry Chemistry.
Here we go.
Welcome back to another episode of Ministry Chemistry, where today we are continuing our conversation on race, racial tensions in this country, where the church lands, all of that goodness. If you did not listen to the most previous episode, we'd encourage you to go back and listen. It's a little long. It's a little longer than we typically aim for. We try to, give you all about 25, 30 minutes of a conversation. But, last week when we hit that 25, 30-minute mark, it just seemed like I was going to cut off some good dialogue.
Not done yet. Switzerland had a lot to say.
Some might be asking, why haven't we invited a guest on? Why are we still three people who are white continuing a conversation about race without...
We're not interested in anyone else's opinion.
Well, I don't know if a plural pronoun inclusive of me would be...
that sounds very judgmental.
Wow.
That's very judgmental.
I'm judgmental? We aren't interested in anyone else's opinion?
I was joking.
We're not even at the minute mark.
I'm joking, Liz.
Why? Oh, there it is. So...
Now we've done it.
Liz Lemon. Anyway, it's because for no other reason than we are externally processing all of this. And we are reading and listening and taking in different voices. We have hopes to invite some folks on down the road. But that this podcast is really a glimpse into conversations that three friends have along the way. We are also ministers of the gospel. We work with teenagers and young adults on the regular. So having a stand or being able to say, I'm not sure where I stand is very important in the work that we do. Before and beyond all of those signifiers, we are followers of Jesus Christ. And that's where we're going to pick it up today. There is a pastor who has claimed that 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings is the most segregated hour in America. And he's referring to racially that throughout this country, you have black churches and white churches. You very rarely have churches of incredible diversity, unless you are a mega church, which by default then you're
integrated.
You're gonna have a much more integrated congregation. Yeah. And so I'm curious, just with that phraseology, the most segregated hour in America, what do you two think about that?
I don't think that necessarily it does fall along racial lines, but it's societal lines too. You have people that, we're meeting in a church right now. There are people that won't meet here, but will meet somewhere else because the style is not their cup of tea.
Like the literal physical environment?
The literal environment, the
musical stylings.
The musical stylings, the message, the things that are theologically spoken from the pulpit aren't everybody's cup of tea, whether they're white, black, brown, or indifferent. I mean, it's just church stylings segregate more than I think
race. But aren't stylings linked sometimes to racial preferences?
Yeah. They sometimes are.
Mike, how does that make you feel?
Delilah. Yeah, I'm not as soft-spoken as Delilah. Two things. One, pastors are essentially modern-day prophets, and the prophets called out wrongs in the church. Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Pastors should totally do that. But is that helpful or divisive right now? And too many pastors have used their big platform, their blue check mark on Twitter, to do anything but bring things together.
Now, wait a minute.
And that is unfortunate to me.
This is just one, so you have to wait for two.
That's one. Two, diversity has become all about race. There's more to diversity than the color of my skin. Lots of churches. I walk into this church that is probably 95% white, but there's a lot of diversity here. There's age diversity. There's socioeconomic diversity. There's cultural diversity. It's not just about skin color. Mm-hmm. And the third thing I would say is This is a total guesstimate. I have nothing to back this up other than snippets of personal experience and conversations. I think white churches have a bigger problem with that than black churches do.
Like white churches worry more about not
diversity
having
than black
people
churches
in their
do.
churches.
Yes.
Like no black churches are going, why don't we have the whites here?
We need to get some more white people in here.
Mm-hmm.
No. So they're like, we like the way we worship. You're welcome to join that if you want to, but if not, that's okay too. Why can't we just be okay with how we're worshiping?
So your first point's very interesting, and I tried to interrupt you. Thankfully, I didn't succeed. Because you
it's
said
hard to do.
what you I forget the phrasing that you used. You said a lot of pastors are being rather divisive right now. Is it the time to call out? What did you say?
I said, sure, call out wrongs in the church.
Yes.
But right now, in the midst of all these like racial tensions, like, is that the time to be further divisive?
Okay, so call out wrongs in the church unless they're divisive.
See, I knew you were going to pick that. I knew you were going to pick on that.
Well, that's what you said, isn't it?
I'm just saying, why don't you bring people together first?
Okay.
Create some cohesiveness.
Of whatever their race, this is the place for everyone to know Christ.
Yeah.
Can I go off on a tangent?
Come together. And then
whatever
Right
their
now.
economic status, bring people together because of Christ. Whatever their sexual orientation, bring people together because of Christ.
Well, and here's
whether they're trans, gay, straight, lesbian, queer, however they identify, bring them together
That's
because
not
of
what I
Christ.
said. That's
I
not
know
what I
it's not
said.
what you said.
That's not what I said at all.
I know it's not what you said at
So
all.
you're putting words in my mouth.
No, I'm trying to understand why wouldn't we call out hard truths in one scenario when in another people are, biting at the bit to do it,
Well, there's
even if it's as divisive.
I'm just saying, I think there's a time and a context. There's a time and a context. For everything, there's a season.
Turn.
There's a
Your
time and
outro.
a context to bring things together,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a time and a context to call out hypocrisy in the church. And you gotta know your platform, and you gotta read the situation to know which is the time to do that. There are times to build up, and there are times to tear it apart.
So here's a real question. Does coming together have to look peaceful? Or
For Christians, yes.
Yes?
Yes. Absolutely. And you say, well, call everyone together under Christ. Call Christians together.
Mm-hmm.
Those who say they believe on the name of Jesus and they want to act out that belief. That's who we call together. Because we're supposed to be an example for those who don't. And we're not being that.
Some are not being that.
A lot are not being that.
Some
I
are.
won't say everyone because I know you hate that, and I hate
Thank
that
you.
too.
I appreciate that.
But a lot. I would say the majority are not being that. I'm not doing any better. I'm calling out people. I'm calling out myself in the process because I've as I said on the last one, I've been very angry, and my way of not contributing to the divisiveness is to just remain silent. But I'll get attacked for remaining silent because I'm supposed to be a white evangelical speaking up for racial issues.
And you get in trouble if you don't say anything.
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
And if you speak up, you could not speak up enough, strongly, boldly, as much on the one side as the other.
No, I couldn't because I don't see as much support for it as some people do.
So a couple weeks ago, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, J.D. Greer, basically did something that many saw as profound, in that he said, of course, Black Lives Matter. All lives are created in the image of God. Doesn't matter your skin tone. Black Lives Matter. We need to recognize that. Here's the problem with saying all lives matter. And he gave another analogy to that. And I've seen many analogies floating around about that. And there were those, though, that said, this is the bare minimum. For him to do this is the bare minimum.
That's the problem with woke culture. You're never going to do enough.
Right.
You're never going to do the right thing. The Minneapolis mayor is living proof of that yesterday when he's like comes out and he's part of the protest, part of the riots, but he's like, oh, I can't go as far as defunding the police. And he gets booed off the stage. you're never going to do enough for woke culture.
Because what does woke culture mean in that regard? Like, woke culture then to me is very scary. In that definition.
It's the mob.
In that definition. Because do I think we need to wake up, open our eyes, open our ears, listen and see and learn? Always.
Sure.
Always.
Absolutely.
But if that means I must take this stance on these things, what if I don't? Can I not still come to a difference of opinion?
You should be able to.
So you still haven't really said whether you believe if 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America.
Yeah, I did. I said I don't. Well, here's another reason I thought of as you were talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you with my thought.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
So number 4.
Yes.
Yeah, D. So one, as I said, I don't think diversity is as narrow as skin color or race. I think it's bigger than that. Is that part of it? Sure. There's also a cultural aspect, and that's beyond racial lines too. Like Appalachian culture, they worship a lot differently in Appalachia than we do here in the suburbs of Columbus. We're white. It's predominantly white there. They worship differently. It is what it is.
Some of that's based on literacy. And I mean that. Like,
I know you do.
Some of it is based on literacy.
That's part of why I'm laughing about it.
And I've thought about that with like hymnals, and we've had this conversation if you've listened to our podcast before. The ability to read music or not, but the ability to read words or not changes how you then teach and learn songs or access Bibles.
Well, yeah, like my grandma partially grew up in the old regular Baptist church, and they still line out hymns. Just if you don't know what that means, someone reads a line of the hymnal, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, and then the congregation sings that line.
Yeah.
And then they go to the next line, and it goes back to the literacy. The other thing I would say, I guarantee you that same pastor who said 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour on Sunday morning would also say that the church is bigger than one building. The church is global. The church is united from the United States to Africa to China. So in that regard, isn't 11 o'clock on Sunday morning the most diverse hour, regardless of time zone, regardless of culture? Aren't we connected here at Picnaz to a church in South Africa worshiping at a similar time of day or whatever? Aren't we somehow in the spirit connected to those people, regardless if we occupy the same space? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have more diversity, but I'm just saying just because it doesn't occupy the same space on Sunday morning doesn't mean it's not there in some regard.
Well, and I think it's particularly of interest when during times of protest and civil unrest, should someone who calls Christ their Lord choose to stay at home and pray, choose to stay at home and care for their family, and teach their children how to live without prejudice, might get looked upon differently than the activist who's present in the public square every day starting at 8 a.m., doesn't go home until 8 p.m. How do you call yourself a Christian if you're not going to go downtown? Well, I can call myself a Christian. I can actually believe the exact same thing you do. The expression of my belief might look differently, and I don't think you get to tell me that it's wrong. Right?
First Amendment right. It says differently, but
What do you mean?
you can say whatever you want.
Well, you can say it. But if we're following the laws of Jesus, do you get to tell me my expression shouldn't look like it does?
I think that I'm not going to whether I'm allowed to or not. I'm like, hey man, if you want to go hold up a sign and march peacefully, go for it. If you want to throw a brick through a window, then you better watch out for tear gas hitting you in the back. I would rather stand in my lawn and have a conversation with my neighbor, because I think that's going to produce far greater results Me as one person, I'm not going to accomplish much on my own, but I don't see that. I see the mob either drawing a bad name to themselves, separating the rioters from the protests, but also see the protests talking at people. And there's not a lot of listening going on. They're talking at people, telling people that they need to listen. And I'm like, if you're carrying a sign and yelling at people, how much listening are you doing? I've done far more listening in the last 2 weeks, standing in my yard, talking to my neighbor, than anyone who's carrying a sign and talking at people. So I can't tell you what to do, but I can judge you for it.
It's so one of the questions that I've seen a pastor post is, it's a 2-part question. How do people who look different than you experience you? And then if you're a Christ follower, how should people who look different than you experience you? And that goes back to that intent of heart that we were talking about during the last episode. But I think about that in terms of expression of our belief. So do I have a problem with someone who decides or chooses to stay at home during these riots but still ardently love Christ? Is ardently the right word? No.
Vivacious.
Do I have a problem with someone who feels compelled to walk in the protests and carry a sign? No. But I do have a problem if you choose to throw a brick through a window. Because I think there are some expressions that don't espouse, I don't know, the entirety of the gospel life we're called to live. Is that fair to say? Mm-hmm. And that's where we feel that there has to be this universal truth that you're either all in or not. So if you're okay with a protester, you should be okay with a brick throwing into a window. No, that's not true. Even the mayor of Atlanta, she gave a great edict essentially to her people saying, stop hurting your own city. Mm-hmm. I am, as a black woman and as a mother of black children, outraged by some of the disparity and tensions and experiences I've had. But the answer is not then tear down your own home. The answer is build up, walk with, work for change.
That's been a great anger. I've been angered a lot about hypocrisy more than anything. But there was a video I saw on Twitter, and it's a black family that owns a small business. I think it was either L.A. or New York. I can't remember. Their business was destroyed. And this elderly black lady's like, you say Black Lives Matter. You lied. She's like, if Black Lives Matter, then why'd you destroy my business? How many black lives have been taken from the riots?
Like
that are broken out since George Floyd died.
Their livelihoods.
No, their life.
Like
period. Deaths. There's the elderly black retired police officer in St. Louis who was murdered. You know, so I mean, there's hypocrisy in that, and I don't know, that part angers me.
Well, and can you be for change, racial change, or growth, and also still want a police force?
Yeah.
I think you can. And I think police officers would say, yeah, you can. We are. Because there's probably more good than not good. Can systemically some accountability measures be put in place to prevent cops who make terrible, murderous decisions being able and allowed to do that? Yes, that also can happen, right?
I was thinking about Brett. Before I interject more, do you have something?
No, please do.
I was thinking about this the other day, and I could be way off base on this, but our current state of things has been kind of a microcosm of first century Rome and Israel in my mind. You've got this Roman authority. It's like we're going to exercise our authority. We're going to keep things in line. We're going to keep things the way they should be in our point of view. And then you've got the mob who's rising up. And you got the people like the Pharisees and the Zealots who, when Jesus comes along, they think that he should do these things. He should lead this uprising.
And in this way.
And then you've got Jesus and this small following of people who say, no, we're going to do it a different way. And even some within his own following, Peter, kind of want to follow the zealot way. They kind of want to uprise. They want to fight back. And Jesus is like, no, we're going to do it this way. And it just feels like there's this tension on both sides, and there's a very, very small minority of people who are actually following the Christ-centered way of bringing about change. And I don't know that I'm one of those people.
That's a good admission, a thoughtful admission. And I'm not here to say you are or you aren't. And I think that's the other piece of the puzzle. What is my responsibility to my sisters and brothers in Christ? What's my responsibility in terms of how I speak up or don't speak up? What's my responsibility? And right now, social media has its pros and cons, and we can talk about that all day. I don't want to. What I do want to say is, in a time of quarantine, it's been a primary source of connection and interaction with others, or at least terrible entertainment. I mean, it's not even, right? It's just, I'm bored again. Maybe I'll check. Someone's posted something funny. Who knows?
I doubt you'll find anything funny right now.
There's very little. I will say, just to bring a little levity to it, there is an account that started on Twitter. I know of one. There's probably more. That it's people who are videoing other people who are videoing or taking pictures of basic white girl, which is, just the common phrase. It might not be a white person, but typically it is a basic person who will use all of what's happening around us for the photo op.
Oh, the influencers?
Yes, the influencers.
Yeah.
Sorry, basic white girls. Influencers is a better phrase. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
They're primarily white girls.
Right? I saw one video, and what's so funny to me is the person who's recording the idiocy. Yes.
There you go.
I was going to say idiocracy, but that's different. The idiocy. So
we're there. We're there. We're living it. If you haven't seen Idiocracy, that's a homework assignment for you.
What is that?
We're living it.
Is
it's a movie.
Oh, is it on Netflix?
I don't know if it's on Netflix.
I haven't seen it.
Idiocracy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's a good challenge.
Yeah.
So anyway, this girl, they park her Cadillac on the curb. I mean, it's a real nice whatever car. It's a Cadillac or BMW or something. She gets out.
Those are different.
Without her mask on. That's a whole nother thing. She asks a guy who's putting up plywood over a business front if she can borrow his drill. Yep. She then puts the mask over her face, holds the drill at an angle. Her buddy takes the picture. She pulls her mask down, gives the drill back, says thank you, gets back in her car and drives away. And I'm like, oh my God. What? That is not an expression of the faith we live.
Yeah, propaganda on Twitter, it posted that some influencer came up and asked to borrow his sign, took a picture of it, and didn't give his sign back. She took his sign.
Yeah, she has to get a picture. Then she took his sign. She took Prop's sign, and Prop's like, "Are you kidding me? Come on."
You can take my sign. Give me the camera.
I also think when we look at a historical perspective, my mom was a teenager in the 60s, and they lived in very rural settings. My grandpa had 2- and 3-point charge churches that he would pastor. And we would ask her, what was life like in the 60s when, the civil rights movement was happening and integration was happening. And it was a little disappointing. Sorry, Mom, she listens. Because she doesn't have any grandiose stories because she wasn't in communities that necessarily had anyone other than white folks. And that goes for economics too, right? They're rural farming communities. And so I think about that, not that she doesn't have stories in her own life of interactions and connections and movements, but I think about now, and I've seen a lot of folks post, I just want to be able to say to my children or my grandchildren when they ask, where were you when this happened? Because this will make the history books. I want to be able to give an account for that.
Well, I think there's
rightly.
Time does not heal all wounds,
No.
but some wounds can only be healed with time. And as we talked about, some of the laws that existed previously, and they've been wiped off the books. They've been changed. It still takes time to heal from those things. So I know our parents' generation is probably a lot more racist, discriminatory than our generation is.
Yeah.
And I think the next generation will be better. And the next generation after that will be better.
To uproot that deep sin.
Because for our parents' generation, an interracial couple was a big taboo.
Oh my goodness.
We don't think anything about that. Like we think very little about that, I should say. Our kids' generation will probably think nothing at all about that. So what I'm getting at is we could probably argue all day about like laws and systemic things that are in place that need to be resolved. We probably differ greatly on that. But in the end, a lot of the things that we're experiencing right now are human issues. They're human nature issues.
They are, and, we can't look to government to solve problems that are spiritual issues. However...
It just turned into a musical.
Because I read something recently that I really appreciated. Someone was like, whenever you use the word but or however, you've negated everything you said prior to that.
It's an eraser word.
It's an eraser word.
Yes.
I do believe I hold these two things at the same time. Let me say it like that. I do not look to government to solve all of our problems.
But.
No, I also hold in fact that some of the problems we have are created by governmental systems.
Oh, and we could debate what those problems are all day long because
we
would probably differ greatly on what we think those problems are.
But I want to agree with you and say that there are human problems, regardless of systems in place, that are at the root and crux of all this. Now, my one of my revelations during all this has been this: if I get facts spewed at me, it doesn't change the stories I've heard. And a parallel I've drawn with that is the resurrection. I'm sure those 12 disciples who were telling the story of Jesus rising again were told by literally everyone they came in contact with, the fact of the matter is, when you die, you die. In all the course of human history, that's been the way it is. That's the fact. The medical facts.
That's still a fact.
The experiential fact. It's still the fact. And yet Jesus didn't, and the only thing they had to go on...
God.
Well, sure. But so often we dismiss people's stories because we say, that's not how the facts stack up.
I'm just trying to understand your parallel. I don't...
And I'm getting there, but you keep talking.
Yeah. I just don't think the parallel exists.
I do think the parallel exists. Because how do we know Jesus is who he says he is today? Yes, he's God. Yes, we experience the Holy Spirit. But it's through the telling of the stories and the faith we've received from generations. And I think there's some credence to be paid to that parallel to right now.
But those stories were based on facts.
Why aren't other stories based on facts that we're just not reading in a statistical way? For instance, higher threat levels in police interactions with individuals of a minority status. Just because we're not seeing it in the numbers doesn't mean there aren't facts to back that up. And so I'm agreeing with you in a way that you don't think I am, but that these are human issues, not necessarily statistical data reference points that we need to lean into and listen.
Well, I would agree with you on facts don't tell the full story always. But
boy, that was a big sentence for you to have to say.
But eraser word.
But facts aren't just based on personal experience either.
No, they're not.
They're based on evidence.
That's right. I agree with you.
And Jesus was Jesus, the only person who rose from the dead, other than people that he called out of the dead specifically.
Right. Yep.
But still Jesus. So the fact remains, when you die, you dead. You be dead. So I'm still struggling with your parallel. But anyway.
My parallel was basically that I don't think we dismiss the stories of real people who have lived real experiences if those stories go against facts that we hold hard and true. I'm asking for not just grace, but a softened heart to hear a perspective that might be different. And I think the agreement with you is it's human nature to board up and wall up and not want to hear. I have a good friend who said this. He said when he finds an article or an opinion online that is 100% exactly how he feels and thinks and believes, he distrusts it immediately because it's clickbait and there's no way he's 100% right on everything. And he needs to find something that challenges him a bit more because it's probably from a different voice and a different perspective. And I was like, dude, that's so great, because I find articles all the time that I'm like, yes, they're saying it just like I want it to be said in just the way I need it to be heard.
So it must be true.
And so it must be true, and I must be right.
See, so I'll wrap my side up with this. Personal experience, personal stories, I should say, personal stories tell me that, sure, there are problems that could be resolved. But to me, they point more to a human nature problem. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you fix that other than Jesus. That's it. That's a heart problem.
You can't legislate human nature.
Evidence does not support a systemic problem, in spite of all the personal stories or experiences. Because I think we've done a lot to solve systemic problems that did exist pre-civil rights. But there's nothing that the government can do to solve the human nature issue.
There is nothing the government can do to solve a human nature issue. I think to your other point that we have put into place solutions to broken systems that should be fixed now. There are many who would say you've shifted the problems to a new one. So you solved maybe what was broken before, but there's still brokenness in the system currently.
And I would love to hear if we have listeners who want to comment or email us, ministrychemistry@gmail.com. I would love to hear your support of those arguments. And please don't blast us with your opinion. I don't care about your opinion.
Aww.
I've got plenty of other people's. I got plenty of people's opinions. You're welcome to bring your opinion if you bring some evidence to support that opinion.
So final thoughts for today, gentlemen. Anything else?
Come together.
I'm done.
Yeah.
We hope that these conversations have been helpful in just hearing some more voices. Gosh, we're hearing a lot of voices these days, so these may not have been helpful. But we hope they are in the sense that maybe you've recognized you're not alone. Maybe you've recognized, oh my gosh, those people on Ministry Chemistry need to be awakened to some new information, and I am going to make it my charge and responsibility and that hilarious word duty to help them.
Woke them up.
Please do it.
To wake us up.
Do it. I am obviously not woke enough. So.
And maybe you've heard some questions that you yourself need to wrestle with. Some of those might be, where's your lines in the sand? Where's your heart softened and hardened to hear other people's stories and perspectives? Where are you seeking truth and looking for facts and understanding the history and the stories and the systems that are claimed to be broken, that may be broken, that are broken, that we all see or we are struggling to see? Our encouragement to you is, again, we hope you're finding a place that you feel confident in and that Jesus is saying, stand right here, I'm with you, and we're going to get through this together. For this week's Ministry Chemistry, I'm Renee.
Still Mike.
And Brad.
We'll talk to you next week.